Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I know I've started a few minutes early before 4 o'clock, but I wanted to make a few quick announcements and to make a quick speech for all of you who are here. So I know people are still sort of filtering in, but I thought it worthwhile to have a start now. So firstly, thank you everyone for joining us here for this webinar, How HR Can Thrive in the New Norm. For a little bit of background about the event, I'm Douglas Leach, head of the event for HR Analytics Summit, an event that we were due to run on the 13th of May, but obviously the current crisis sort of put a stop to that in the meantime, and so we've postponed it till September. I know a lot of you are already attending, but I know some of you aren't aware of our other event. Obviously, it's quite a big gap. And so we were looking and we were thinking, like, what can we do? How can we still sort of provide a service for the HR community? And then we just thought it'd be a really great opportunity to support both the HR professionals and workforce as a whole, as well as help support a worthy charity. And I know mental health is a cause that is very close to my heart. And given the current situation, I know it's put a huge strain on people's mental well-being, as well as the services in place to support people with these sorts of challenges. So we thought it'd be a great opportunity to really help the community as a whole, as well as raise money for a really worthy cause. So also, thank you so much for all of our attendees who've signed up for this webinar. It's absolutely brilliant and really great to see support for HR and charities such as mine. So basically, we thought it'd be really good to look at the current climate and what it represents with regard to the paradigm shift of the way that people are working. I know many organizations already support sort of flexible working and remote working to some extent, but very few are set up to support consistent remote working, people being in complete isolation, and not in a holistic way by any stretch. I know it's been definitely a real change and a challenge for a lot of people and companies. So what we're looking to do is to blend the operational side of HR, looking at how executives can work in this sort of new environment, how HR leaders can run a department within this sort of new world that we're living, and how we can shape both the form and the function of HR with this new norm, whatever it turns out to be, for however long it turns out to be. So we're looking as well at how the function can continue its previous laid plans and development, how we can continue down a path without everything sort of going completely off track, as well as looking at how you can sort of grow as an individual and continue to develop, especially in times like this, which is crisis and everything's all over the place, how HR can sort of form the future of the workplace. You know, will the workplace go back to normal relatively quickly, or will this really be this paradigm shift which is going to be here to stay, or will it be somewhere in the middle? There's a lot of questions that a lot of people have. We thought it'd be really good to get some HR leaders and experts to come together to really share their thoughts and insights, as well as sort of how HR can also continue to support the workforce in more of a compassionate sense. I know a lot of people are really struggling with the isolation, as well as sort of trying to engage the workforce by having absolutely no contact points with them directly. You know, a lot of these signs with regards to sort of mental health and well-being deterioration are often easy to spot when you're in an office, when you're seeing people day to day with colleagues and friends, and you know, suddenly someone looks to be struggling or has a change in their personality or actions. You can generally, you know, you can identify it and you can intervene in the manner that you see appropriate. However, generally with isolated working, that poses a real challenge, and so we thought it would be really good to address this. I'm sure, as you're all aware, all the proceeds from this event are being donated to the charity Mind. I know they do some absolutely fantastic work, and I'm sure Faye can tell some worrying statistics, but I know the number of calls and the sort of their terms of workload has gone up tremendously. So it's really great to be able to support them, who in turn can support people that really need their support. A little bit of housekeeping with regards to questions. We'll be taking live questions at 5 p.m. once all of the content is finished. To do that, you can either click the raise your hand button that will give you the option to ask a question directly through your microphone, which our panels can ask. But you can also ask questions at any time through the Q&A function, which is being monitored by our panel. So address questions directly to them or as a panel as a whole, and if they're not speaking at the time, they'll try and answer as best they can. We'll also then be upvoting at the end, so we have the option to upvote interesting questions. So if the audience as a whole have a particular area of interest, they can identify that, and then the panel as a whole can discuss it. As I say, that will be from 5 p.m. We also have a few polls for our attendees, so watch out for those. They should pop up during the presentations, just with a few options, so just click that, and it really helps us to gauge the areas of interest for the audience, what the audience are thinking, and what your thoughts are with regards to the current crisis and the presentations and everything that's going on. So just keep a lookout for those, but they are anonymous, so there's going to be no singling out of anyone, so don't worry about that. Finally, post-event, we're going to be recording this through the cloud, which we'll then go through, edit, clean up, do everything else our side, which we'll then send out to you guys via email. So, please do feel free to share that, send it around. This isn't really a commercial endeavor. This is just about sort of trying to raise awareness and trying to help people as much as we can. So I think that brings it to an end of all of my announcements. And again, everyone, thank you so much for attending. Steve, if you'd like to take the post to open us with our 4 p.m. session around leveraging people analytics to help organizations navigate through the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond.
Great, absolutely. Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. And great to be with you all here, even under these very strange circumstances. I'm dialing in here from a beautiful sunny North Yorkshire, which is fantastic. Quick introduction. My name is Steve Scott, Global Head of Workforce Management and Analytics for Standard Chartered. Standard Chartered, if you're not familiar with it, other than the name on the front of the Liverpool shirt, a global bank of about 90,000 colleagues, predominantly in Africa and Asia and developing markets. And prior to that role, I joined Standard Chartered in October last year. Prior to that, I had a similar role at Lloyds Banking Group. For the session that I've got the next 10 minutes to look at, I want to explore some of the use cases that I've been using in Standard Chartered, or I've become aware of, talking to my peers, that we've been using to highlight the value of workforce analytics through this pandemic. I'll also look at some of the potential use cases I see for people analytics teams to use as we emerge out of this crisis and move into the new norm, and a couple of thoughts on enablers to leveraging value in the short term. But what are the things we've been up to? I'm sure either my team or some of yours. Well, one of the first things we had to do was understand where our colleagues were. As we were moving them from base locations into working from home scenarios, we needed to understand their working status. Were they working base sites, different sites, home? And we were also, of course, very keen to understand the health status. So put a lot of mechanisms in place, originally manually, to get things up and running, but then over time we've automated that. But we wanted to know if they were showing symptoms, if they were isolated, if they were, if they were hospitalised, and all of that aggregated data was captured, brought up to the exec level to help them navigate the business through the crisis. Where were their operational challenges? Where were the colleague challenges in terms of well-being that we needed to wrap our arms around? That then connected into contact tracing, of course. So as soon as we knew that somebody was showing symptoms, we needed to put in protocols around contact tracing, identifying colleagues they've been in touch with, deep cleaning of offices, and the like. And it was the teams such as ours that the business were coming to help with that, to bring in the data and the processes to facilitate that. Not what we were expecting to do at the beginning of 2020. As we kind of overcame those initial challenges, we then started to want to do continuous listening. And I'm sure many of you have launched pulse surveys to understand how colleagues are feeling as they're going through this crisis. How are they responding to the impacts of such drastically changing working conditions? So we used pulse surveys to understand their sentiment, their mood. Were they getting the right communication? Were they getting the right support from leadership? Were they getting the right support in terms of technology and dealing with Zoom and Blue Jeans or whatever other VC devices? What could we learn from our colleagues to help us take further actions? I'm sure, like us, we're also looking at some of the impacts that we were seeing, and one that we saw was colleagues were cancelling holidays. We needed to undertake analysis of leave. We could see relative to previous years that we were building up increasingly amounts of leave to be taken, and that helped inform HR policy and changes to HR policies going forward. And then equally, attrition. Attrition in Standard Chartered is reducing through the crisis. People aren't leaving as you would expect. And so we needed to understand attrition trends and predict forward using analysis to see what would that mean for us in terms of our headcount and our numbers at the year end, and how did that match to our budgets. So a whole raft of things that emerged. It really threw the people analytics team into the spotlight in helping HR navigate through. One other one that was interesting that I saw was capability matching. So as organizations were seeing that there was reduced demand in one area of their operation, but increased demand in another, they were using a capability matching tool that they developed to see which roles, which people could move where there was low demand into those high demand areas, which I thought was quite innovative. In terms of looking forward, then, how do we see workforce analytics team helping as we emerge through the crisis? The first one, and relevant given the charity we're supporting here today, is what I call well-being analytics, which is a broad term for all of the analytics we can do that will help support the well-being of our employees and our colleagues. It can be things such as analysing the effectiveness of any well-being tools that we put in place. Are the take-ups there that we expected? Is the feedback in line with what we would want it to be? What can we learn about how those tools are being used to revise and implement better solutions if they're not quite working? Well-being analytics in terms of understanding, back to that sentiment piece about working from home. What support do we need to put around colleagues who maybe we don't need them to come back into the office going forward? Maybe they do need to. We can take advantage of an opportunity for them to work more fully from home. But that equally then creates some challenges from a well-being perspective too. So analytics to make sure that we're picking the right roles to stay working from home, and that we're not forcing people into those situations where their role doesn't fit for that working pattern. I also see an opportunity for organisational network analysis or relationship network analysis. And this idea of working out through that technology, through that type of analytics, to understand how work is getting done. And if you can understand how work was getting done before people started working from home so prolifically, and then how it's changed, you can use that to help determine which roles are most suited to remote working or office working or hybrid working, where you have flexibility to move between office and home. So organisational network analysis, I think, it will be really useful in the months ahead. How do we remain collaborative, connected as an organisation when we're more disparate than we've ever been in terms of our locations? Employee experience and employee listening, I think, are going to ramp up in the months and years ahead, actually. Colleague journeys are changing dramatically. I had somebody in my team who joined recently, joined in the crisis. And so he was onboarded into an empty office. And what an incredible experience. It's not what we'd planned for our onboarding experience, but actually listening to colleagues through whichever channels you're using, and using that with an analytics support to think about the journeys and the moments of truth and the moments that matter for colleagues as we return to this, the new norm, as I've heard it called, will be really important. Strategic workforce planning, if any of you are doing that, I think this is going to accelerate the need for SWP. Strategic workforce planning, the future of work. Sometimes businesses resist participating in that type of exercise. They see it, well, it's the future. I don't need to do it now. I need to concentrate on the here and now. Actually, the fact that we're all talking to each other like this proves that the future is here now. And so any plans that you have for strategic workforce planning, bring them forward. As we return back to our new norm, the implications on size, spend, site, the skills is more critical, and shape is more critical than ever. So acceleration of SWP. I think as we use more and more digital products in this new world, whether it's digital learning, remote coaching, whatever it might be, talent marketplaces that connects people digitally with people with skills, with those with opportunities internally, I think HR analytics can be used to support the evaluation of the effectiveness of those tools. Again, using a combination of techniques, but working out what it is that we need to do differently to leverage value and actually evidence impact of those new ways of working. A big thing I think analytics can help with as we move through this crisis and beyond is leadership, actually, and understanding what leadership capabilities will be required in this now rapidly accelerating future of work. I'm sure you've all heard of VUCA and the volatility, the uncertainty, the change and the ambiguity that we're working in. This is probably the most VUCA period of our lives. So what are the leadership capabilities that we require to build, to dial up, and then unleash across our organizations to make sure that we are supporting the colleagues, our employees, with the appropriate level of leadership capability. And then I think, of course, business. Let's come back to the business and the business impacts. Workforce analytics can be really important in helping to resolve business challenges, whether that's productivity, whether it's client retention, client engagement, whatever it might be. Don't lose sight of how analytics can inform decisions to support business opportunities or business challenges. And depending on your industry, your organization, those could be significant right now. And HR analytics teams will have a really pivotal role to play in helping their organizations navigate through those challenges. So how do we unlock, how do we leverage the value that workforce analytics can offer? I'm sure anybody on this call is as passionate as I am about the opportunities that workforce analytics can provide, but sometimes unlocking that potential is difficult. So just a couple of thoughts. One is, I think you have to understand the business problem, the business challenge, and the context, the organizational context. I see far too many times when an analytics team or a data team jump straight into the data, and they'll go away and they'll work on fantastic modeling and some fantastic analytics, and they'll come back, and what they present they're very proud of, but it just doesn't land. It doesn't give what the stakeholder required because they've totally missed the business context. So keep that at the forefront of your mind as you're talking to stakeholders and translating into analytics requirements. But what is the business problem? I think a second is around being prepared to use the data that you've got. If you wait for perfect data, it will never come. And actually, there's a momentum now that's building in terms of the value of people analytics to support HR functions. We need to keep that momentum going. And if we stall to say, oh, we can't do that, we need more data, then we'll go backwards and miss the opportunity. So don't wait for the perfect data. Use the data that you have and caveat accordingly that you may be missing certain aspects of the data, but you can get value from the data that you already have. And finally, I think more than ever, this period has shown us of the importance of being agile, hugely collaborative with people that you might not normally be talking to in your organizations, but collaborative, but more than that, even this spirit of agility. The can-do attitude, the kind of positivity of mindset, and going with things like a minimum viable product, not waiting for perfection, but taking an MVP and say, this is good enough for now, let's get something to market, and then we'll evolve and we'll iterate over time. That I think we've seen a lot of that in my team in Standard Chartered over the past few months. Seen much more of that willingness to just get something out that we'll do and we'll iterate it, but being agile is really helping to unlock the value of analytics. So I think that is my time up. Hopefully that was useful, and I'm now going to pass on to Melissa.
Excellent, thank you, Steve. My name is Melissa Kantor, and I look after all things people, data, analytics, and technology for the LEGO Group. Last year, we embarked on a modernization program, which was meant to completely step change our HR ecosystem. And it was built around 4 main pillars: around productivity, agility, influence, which is kind of the next step beyond analytics by design, and employee experience. And we're super excited to move this forward. Last year, as part of this initiative, we launched Vizier People Analytics. And this January, we kicked off a global Workday implementation. And the kickoff was amazing. We were well on our way. And then the world changed quite fundamentally. And obviously that impacted our journey and our ability to deliver. And we had to sit there and think about, what does this mean for our transformation program? What does this mean? How can we respond? And there's really 5 main areas that we can clearly see how we were impacted. The first is fairly obvious, the current way of working. There's no more travel. We're all working from home. How do you work across vendors, implementation partners, and global teams when you can't see each other? And some are better at working virtually than others. And if you think about workshops, daily stand-ups, big team meetings, whiteboarding out potential integration strategies, none of this we were able to do. We had to find a way to do it all virtually. And I'm glad to say we were able to do some myth busting as well. When we started, we thought we'd probably take a productivity hit. And really, we didn't. I think we found creative ways to do things virtually. I think, yes, maybe workshops done virtually, you'd go at a bit of a slower pace, you don't have all day workshops, and maybe that takes a bit longer. But some of the focus work that you can do, process documentation, those sorts of things, can go maybe a bit faster. So all in all, we've realized that actually, from this new virtual way of working, we've adjusted as a team pretty well, and we haven't really seen direct productivity impacts to the delivery of the projects because of that. However, we did see some productivity hits related to kind of the second area we needed to contend with, and that was massive capacity constraints across HR and our shared service. All of a sudden, a lot of the people working on the project, providing input and guidance, are now on the front line of our response to COVID. They're making sure that they're enabling the business and they're supporting our employees, and that is absolutely the priority. Unfortunately, that meant they had less time to give to our project. So what did that mean? Well, we had to pivot and rethink of a lot of the things we were going to do. A great example is related to this concept of gathering the requirements for our local countries. Our approach to understanding our new global processes was to work on a global standard design and then work with each country to ensure we're taking care of the nuances related to that country for regulatory requirements and payroll validations and those sorts of things. Unfortunately, we were meant to do this in a 2-week grand country validation time, and unfortunately that just didn't happen. And we're not going to do that work in 2 weeks now. We're probably going to spread it all over 12 weeks. And that is to minimize the impact to our guys on the ground who are really at the forefront of our COVID response. We also changed the way we're engaging with them. The project team is leaning in more to try to create more straw mans and to do as much heavy lifting as possible. And we ran a virtual workshop, and we did a pilot in Denmark to see exactly how can we, in a virtual way, work closely with the countries to gather requirements and make sure we understand them properly and make sure the countries feel comfortable that we're understanding and learning things properly. That workshop was really successful, and we had a lot of learnings from that pilot that we're now adopting into a template that we can use for each of the countries we operate in going forward. And that's a main focus of our work actually on the next month or two. Another area we had to contend with was reprioritization across the business and within the project and within the functions working on the project. A great example is related to our Visier rollout. We launched last year to HR, and it's wonderful. Our goal this year was to embed it within HR and really ensure our HR user base is adopting Visier and using it as much as possible. We're also planning to roll it out to people leaders globally this year. Because of the new world that's happened, we've decided to slow down the rollout to people leaders and said, yes, if some functions want to roll it out to people leaders, that's fine, but now's probably not the best time to land something new like that. So let's wait and do it maybe later this year, early next year. Another shift we had is once Visier launched, we have lots of data sets we want to move into it. And we're planning to do some work this year on position management and some more compensation elements into the solution. And we paused that to build and develop analysis and dashboards that can support our COVID response. So Visier already pulls data in from the World Health Organization that we were able to marry with our employee data and contact tracing that our shared service does. And we're able to present dashboards to our crisis management team to help them with their response. And every day, we're constantly reprioritizing within the work streams. What does that mean for our Workday implementation? We are absolutely committed to going forward with our Workday implementation, but we recognize because of the new prioritizations in the business, our response to COVID, our response to enabling our business to perform and our employees to perform takes priority. We understand the capacity constraints. So we've decided to replan. Our original launch was in January of next year, and we know we're not going to hit January of next year. But we don't know what our new go live date is yet. We're currently replanning, and we're looking to see and try to understand what our capacity is and how much change can we absorb and when. And that kind of results in kind of the fourth main area that really struck us, and that is the ability to operate in ambiguity. We always talk about that, and working in ambiguity is very different than working agilely. Agilely means being able to change and pivot to meet changing needs and demands. Ambiguity means you don't know what those changing demands are. And we can tell that some members of our project team really struggle without having a go live date. We don't know what it is, yet we're still marching forward. That's really hard for some folks to internalize. Others flourish in that environment. And I have to say, my hat's off to both Workday, our vendor, and our implementation partner, Deloitte, who have really supported us when we said, when we launched in January and started, we had this great plan, this great kickoff, and now things are so uncertain, we need to be able to respond quickly and agilely as things change. And we shifted the model that we work between us. And we now have a long and thin approach to the implementation. We dial up and dial down effort across the board as needed, so we can make sure that we're enabling our employees and responding to whatever comes out of the COVID needs as quickly as we can. So that for us is really interesting, working on a massive transformation program in a reduced capacity and really only detailed planning out kind of the next 8 weeks or so and constantly checking. That said, we will have, you know, a new target replan date, hopefully by the end of the quarter, and we'll all be working towards that. But it's caveated and footnoted, obviously, depending what the new world order brings and how we need to respond. And I think that the fifth main area we had to contend with was doubt that we could continue. When everything happened and all of our HR folks are being pulled in lots of different directions, we can't travel, we have to work from home. For a lot of folks, that was, wow, how on earth can you actually deliver a traditional project when you have consultants flying in every week, you're having big team workshops with 30 people around the table? It's not possible. And we said, actually, thankfully, LEGO has a fairly flexible culture already. Many of our employees are quite comfortable working from home, and our consultants are generally quite comfortable working from home. That said, could we still achieve everything we were planning to achieve? And again, I thank everyone in LEGO and our partners for having strong partnerships that enabled us to work really flexibly and agilely to pivot to make sure we can work as effectively as possible. And we're able to prove that we can deliver. And actually our first prototype was ready and launched this month. And I'm super proud of that achievement because a lot of folks didn't think we could get there. And it's not perfect. It's maybe not what we meant it to be, but it is a great step forward. And the bits that are not in there, obviously, is the localizations for the countries, because that's going to take some time. And we're really trying to buffer our country colleagues as much as we can from the impacts of projects until they have a bit more bandwidth. I think that's a bit of a summary about the things that we've been contending with on our modernization journey. We're absolutely loving the craziness of it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the future brings. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to hand over to Dyanne.
Thank you so much for that, Melissa, and also to Steve. My name's Dyanne Ierardo, and I work for Verizon, and we're a US parented company. We have about 140,000 employees globally, and I'm responsible for human resources for the whole of international. So that's me. So I'm going to kind of walk you through a journey that we've been on this year. So firstly, I relocated to London from Australia in late December last year. And so, as you could imagine, there's all of the trials and tribulations with relocation, which, you know, our company has handled very, very well. But coming into London, spending, you know, like a month and a half, and then COVID hit. So if you think about our footprint, I'm going to give you a journey around the globe. So COVID hit in Asia Pacific at the end of January, early February. And so from then, and we have offices in China and throughout Asia Pacific, it was my responsibility with the global real estate teams, employee health and safety teams, and the business continuity teams to really look at our employee health and the way that we were going to mobilize our workforce. The pandemic, as you know, has been like a spider web, and it's spread right the way from Asia, right the way through now to Europe and the United States. And that happened over a period of like 6 weeks. What we did initially as a company is the first thing for us was our employee health. And so it was about mobilising our workforce to get them to work from home, which was a huge feat in itself. And within a week, we'd mobilised our complete workforce. Predominantly our employees are in the United States. We have about 14,000 employees in international, if you take into account all of our business units. And so for us, it was getting our employees home, ensuring that they had the right equipment that they need to use, setting them up and understanding the differences with working from home, because we had some parts of the business that hasn't been the practice historically. And so it was around the way that we communicate, getting our leaders ready to be able to lead remotely. And so it became the new normal for our employees over that week to 2 weeks. We went through training and obviously a lot more emphasis on conferencing, which Steve spoke about earlier. And funnily enough, we purchased blue jeans about a month ago. The close happened recently. And so it was about leveraging off, ensuring that we have conferencing processes for all of our employees so that they could use them. If you think about historically, people are used to getting together and having a meeting. And so we've had to change that approach to have more of this sort of an environment, which for some areas of the business has been more of a challenge than others. The other component of health, and I know as Steve spoke through it earlier, was the whole thing of tracing employees if they were infected, the way that we communicated to families, the managing of health globally, because obviously every country has different regulations that we need to follow. But it was really ensuring that we keep our employees as the number one mindset. We then moved into what we call the new normal, which is now, and it's really about leading remotely, getting our leaders up to how that happens, what they need to do differently, the amount of check-ins they're having with their people, the eyeballing of them through conferencing, the sort of communication they're doing. But the thing that we found is that it became more social. And so our employees, funnily enough, even though they weren't sitting desk to desk alongside of each other, the amount of interactions that are happening because of this and this isolation, we've noticed that our employees, the engagement seems to be even more positive. The other thing I'd like to mention to you is that what generally happens in isolation, and it happens normally around week 4 or week 5, is a thing that I call cabin fever, where employees and humans get annoyed with being isolated, that their norm is no longer their norm, that going out to the shop is not something that they can do, and working from home and not being in an office environment. So we as a company have done a lot of work around psychological health, because at the outset I talked to you about physical health and getting employees safe, but the most important thing for us right now is that whole focus on how are our employees feeling. We're promoting our employee assistance programs. We're training our leaders up and have been on how do you manage remotely? How do you have more conversations that are a little more personal in terms of check-ins? So it's not just a work conversation, but a check-in about what's going on around them. And that has fared very well. Throughout the period of the last few months, our company has also conducted pulse surveys or employee surveys, which are quick check surveys, specifically around COVID, in terms of the way they're operating, where they're working, what they need more from the company, and also, how they're feeling about their efficiency and what we can be doing as a company to help them. Our CEO and chairman and our CHRO, who are located in the United States, were holding daily sessions with all employees to dial into, so that they were communicating directly with all of our employees from a global perspective about what they find is important right now. And obviously for us, that was our employee health and safety, that of our customers, and also the community around us. And so that's another thing that we've done around comms to ensure that they're getting the global, what I call attention. Then we've had our local managers that have been running different sessions for them. And then there's the personal check-ins that have occurred. As you would have all experienced, there's been talk around the globe of countries that are opening up, and the fact that we have now parts of China which have opened, they've released their borders. And so for us as a company, we're starting to explore that return to office. And interestingly enough, and it's similar to what Melissa spoke about earlier, it's us looking differently at that footprint of what does the working model need to be going forward. And what we've noticed is that we can mobilise our workforce and get them to work from home. and still get productivity, you know, that we needed and efficiencies. And so we're currently going through, what does that return to office look like? You know, there are never prizes to being first in a situation like this. So it's something that we're doing slowly, obviously needing to take into account government legislation, regulations, and ensuring that we're following what the World Health Organization are telling us. But also we have our Verizon standard, and that's putting our employee health at number one. So that's started. We're doing a lot of work in the background around what does that look like, what is social distancing going to be in each of our offices for those employees that actually need to be in an office, and also exploring what about the employees that actually don't need to be in an office, and we've proven this throughout this time. What does that look like? So lots of exploration there. When I think about the lessons that we've learned, or when I reflect on, you know, what I've learned, I guess the things that have stood out for me, and we talked about this prior to coming onto this session today, just about how differently it is that people are showing up. They're showing more of their authentic self. You know, we talked earlier about maybe a baby crying in the background, or a dog barking when you're on a conference, or people walking past you, and how historically for a lot of organisations that's not been the norm, and you get stressed out because of that. Whereas now it's a little more, what I'd say I'm noticing is a little more relaxed. And so our employees, we're placing a lot more emphasis on that personal check-in and that personal connection. And I think that's something that I've seen as a result of this, that I think even though the pandemic is shocking and the amount of lives that have been lost globally is devastating, when I look at the good thing that's come out of this is I think that our social conferencing tools and the fact that we've all globally been in it together has meant that, you know, teams are getting closer together as a result of having this common thing that we've been experiencing. I guess the next step for us, as I said, is returning to the office, but also, as I said, looking at roles that potentially don't need to return to the office and what that looks like. And then taking it from there will obviously be all of the strategies that we need to do around mobilising the new normal for us as a corporation. I'm really, you know, I'm very proud to work for the company that I do. And, you know, as I said, our pulse results of the check-ins we've done has given us feedback directly to tell us that the employees feel as though we're doing all of the right things. And the most important thing I think throughout this whole process is the fact that we're asking them how they feel, what they need from us as a leadership team to continue to be effective and to be successful. So they're probably the biggest messages for me. And with that now, I'd like to hand over to Catriona. So over to you, Catriona.
Thank you very much, Dyanne. So I'm delighted to take part today and to speak to you some ideas that I have for how we can continue to focus on our personal and professional development during these very challenging times. So first, a really quick introduction to myself and Avon. My name is Catriona. I head up people analytics at Avon. Avon hardly needs any introduction as it's such an iconic brand. It's been around now for over 130 years. And right from the start, it was powered by the direct selling model, with women in particular taking the lead in selling the products door to door. And this model still lives on today, but of course now the paper brochure runs alongside our digital side of the business. And in fact, the current pandemic has driven absolutely huge accelerated change in this area, with tens of thousands of Avon representatives opening up their online Avon stores during lockdown, which has been amazing to see. I'm also proud to work for Avon because of the women's causes we champion, and a key one being initiatives to bring an end to gender-based violence against women and girls. And again, a topic which unfortunately has raised its ugly head due to the pandemic, with increases in domestic violence. We're also at a really exciting stage in Avon's story. As earlier this year, we became part of the Natura group. Natura is a Brazilian global personal care and beauty company. They also have Body Shop and Aesop in the group, so we're now part of this exciting group. So another reason why we've been so busy in HR at the moment is due to helping to lead the change to successfully transform the business just as the pandemic arrived. So moving on to the current COVID situation, for many of us, we feel busier and really challenged, but I think we can still find time for our own development by approaching it differently. And by that, I mean actively embracing two things which this pandemic has definitely led to. The first being the online nature of our existence these days, plus the extra need we're all feeling for connectedness. So there are four areas I'd like to just talk briefly about. First is the idea of micro steps rather than goals. And then the three areas which I've personally focused on is the increase in virtual events, online learning and sharing knowledge, and finally mentoring. So at Avon, we recently introduced a new app called Thrive. This is for all of our employees. It's got lots of great videos and blogs and advice about the themes of mental resilience, improving well-being, ideas for leading teams through these difficult times. Now, Thrive talks about micro-steps, and it prompts you to set a maximum of 2 micro-steps each day. For example, a recent leadership-themed one for me was at the beginning of each day, think about what you accomplished. And that's because it's more important than ever at the moment to celebrate our small wins. So whilst Thrive is really about driving well-being, and as the name suggests, it's to help us thrive during this time, I see it as being exactly the same for our personal and professional development. So that's setting small achievable tasks to help you towards what might be a much bigger goal. The bigger goal might be absolutely impossible for you to reach during lockdown, either due to lack of time or because your business goals actually are now no longer a priority, as you found yourself working much more tactically at the moment. So what I'm doing is also setting myself micro steps each day in terms of my personal development. So it might be something just like, find and read a blog on LinkedIn article, a LinkedIn article on the subject of workforce planning, or listen to the latest month's People Analytics podcast from a People Analytics leader, for example. So this brings me to the first area that I would suggest is attending virtual events. So I believe it's really important to network and look externally and outwards from your day-to-day role to learn more about the field you're working in. I'm using this especially now that I'm in People Analytics. It's an area that, of course, has taken off exponentially in the last few years. There's no single course I could have gone on a couple of years ago to start learning about this area. And even if there was, it would have been out of date as soon as I'd been on it. So during lockdown, I've attended the online PAFAO conference, which is People Analytics and Future of Work. I'm sure many of you have heard of it and probably attended. I was lucky enough to attend it last year in London. And this year, despite it having to move online, it was a really fabulous few days with brilliant case studies from different companies. And I attended a few sessions that week, and I learned a lot by hearing, directly from People Analytics thought leaders. And through engaging with it online chat and comments, I also felt really connected. So I urge you to explore what online events there are in your specific area that might be available in the coming weeks and months, as many events are going to go online. And of course, actually, it's going to be far more easy to access than before. So even though some may, of course, still charge a fee, there won't still be that need to get approval for travel, hotel costs, etc. to attend, and you can attend sessions really from wherever you are, time zone permitting, of course. The second area is online learning, but really with a focus of talking about the blurring of boundaries between what's learning, but then what's communication, what's connecting, and what's sharing ideas. At Avon last year, we launched a staying connected platform called Inside Avon. The slogan for that platform was connect, learn, share. And focusing on those 3 words, I think this shows so clearly the future of learning and the blurring of boundaries now between how we connect with others and collaborate and share ideas and how we learn. And of course, this was starting to be the case before COVID-19 came along, but it's really accelerating this. So within the platform at work, I can search for online learning content which might meet my development goals. And I'm sure many of you could do the same at your organisations. But what strikes me at the moment is the power of being able to share knowledge. On Inside Avon, we have blogs and videos from our leaders talking about subjects from dealing with the pandemic to sharing ideas and plans to reset the business. Our CEO talks about people as multipliers, and this is about each person through the way that they work and collaborate and share with others, how they can really make a difference to each other and the organisation. So as well as viewing online content for your own learning, I'd urge you to think about how you can share your knowledge. So by sharing a piece of online learning for colleagues by video or in a forum such as today's webinar or in a face-to-face format in the future. This will really allow you to grow in your organisation and will aid your personal development too. So I think, Douglas, can we do the poll now, please?
Yep, the poll's running at the moment. I can close it if you'd like the results.
Oh, why not? Well, I'm just about to talk about mentoring, so yes, why not? Let's have a look.
Jolly good.
Okay, interesting. So no, you haven't considered mentoring. Well, that's good actually, isn't it? So I can maybe make some impact with what I'm about to say. So I want to talk about mentoring. So the focus here is very much on connecting and talking. I think this is why it fits so well with the current challenging times. It's that mentoring is really effective to improve both the mentors and the mentees' mental health, as well as the obvious professional development. It can also bring connectivity, support, and even the kindness that so many of us need right now. We don't actually have a formal mentorship scheme at Avon, although, as I mentioned already, there's most definitely the culture of sharing ideas and connecting across the business, and that idea of people as multipliers and us supporting and advising each other. So, but I went on a mentoring website about a year ago called pushfar.com, and I went on there to find a mentor for myself. But funnily enough, actually, as it stands now, I haven't found one, and actually I'm mentoring 2 people. So both reached out to me, and I find that I gained so much myself, for example, in how they feed back to me and what they heard in my advice. But also, one thing I love is that I do get diversity of thought. So it's great for someone like me to hear from a millennial point of view. So in my discussions, I think it's great that I get that. I mean, diversity of any sort's powerful, and I love that aspect. So you don't necessarily need to go onto a mentoring platform, if that doesn't appeal. That's formal mentoring. What I would say though is, do think about what advice or steer you could do with at the moment in your career or in your role. Think about what people you've worked with before, or maybe people in your current company who lead in a way that you really like. Even at its simplest, it could just be reaching out to a contact that you've not spoken to in ages and have a call with them to discuss what you've both been doing. So, you can think of it as trading in your Zoom family quiz night call with a different kind of Zoom call that's actually going to help your professional development. And lastly, there's a quote I really like, which is, if you want to get better at something, ask for advice instead of feedback. So again, at this time, it just seems like a really great time to get out there and ask for advice and simply to talk, whether it's a formal mentor talk or not. So to wrap up, I'd just like to say, whatever you do, I think, whatever you do try in terms of your own micro steps around networking, online events, knowledge sharing, mentoring, it'd be great to capture all of these small achievements as you go along, so that you can remind yourself when you look back in the future on what you've achieved by way of your own development, during this period where obviously none of us are going to forget it, when the pandemic really changed the way that we work. So thank you, and I'm going to now pass over to Mark at GSK.
Thank you, Catriona. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm actually going to share my screen a little bit, so hopefully that comes up okay. But I'm going to take a slightly different tack. I'm not going to frame my discussion too much around COVID-19, but really I wanted to talk a little bit about my ideas for the future of work and how people analytics can inform our understanding of how jobs change and evolve, and how we can perhaps start to get ahead of the current environment to plan what the future might look like when we start to come out of this. So obviously, I mean, the environment with respect to COVID-19 is an important one, and one which we definitely need to take into account, and it will provide the backdrop for innovation. So we'll touch on that as we go forward. My name is Mark Lawrence. I'm the Head of Organisation and People Analytics at GSK. I think GSK is a really interesting organisation because it's got a really rich and diverse history, right the way through from initially selling babies' powdered milk all the way through to the drugs and vaccines that we supply today and continue to innovate around. When I look at the jobs and how they evolve over time, not just within the context of GSK, but in general, it really does spark the historian in me. And for those of you that know me, you might realize that my first degree was actually in history and archaeology. So this is actually a chance for me to bring out another passion rather than talking necessarily about people analytics. But some jobs are ancient and enduring, and picking up on Catriona's point there, we can see that mentoring, for example, we can look right back at the ancient Greeks for examples of mentoring, but many jobs are not. For me, the history of work is very much the history of reflecting societal change. Jobs come and go, they change, sometimes overnight. For example, if we look at jobs associated with the advent of microprocessors, there was a whole industry spawned within the space of a few months. Some jobs change over decades or even centuries if we look at things like soldiering or farming. We can look at economic disruption, the agricultural revolution, industrial revolution. We can look at political disruption. Many of you will immediately curl back in horror when I mention Cambridge Analytica. But even that led to a massive growth in the interest of analytics and the ethics around analytics. So perhaps when we consider COVID-19 and all of the restriction around that, perhaps we should also be considering the opportunity around that and how we can help to steward our organizations to be doing more relevant work in ways that are more in tune with the environment that we interact with and with the staff that we seek to employ. There's no doubt, however, that over the last 30 years, which ushered in the widespread use of the internet for recreational and work purposes, there's been, probably the single most significant change and force for acceleration. The pace of innovation and change at the moment is just incredible. This has led to more recent phenomenon of trend spotting. So if we consider the job trend spotters, this is a new job. This is something which didn't exist 20 years ago. And I first met a trend spotter in 2011, a chap called Magnus Lindqvist. And he talked about the fact that actually trend spotting is very much an idea of having a good data set and using it in a way that will help you to understand the future. Now, where you draw those data sets from, whether that's the economy, whether that's a particular job that you're analyzing, actually it's exactly the same process that we use for people analytics. Taking data sets from multiple different sources, testing them, looking for relationships, and then seeking to use those insights to understand not only the past, where we've come from, but where we might be wanting to get to in the future. Philip Tetlock, Dan Gardner, super forecasting, they talk about this becoming a science, the science of prediction. And then in 2018, Agarwal, Gans and Goldfarb, don't worry, there will be a bibliography at the end for anybody that's interested. They really then consider the science of prediction to have become a branch of economics. So it's gaining academic weight, and it's something which I don't think we can afford to ignore any longer. So when seeking to understand the future, we do need to consider where we've come from, as I said. Predictive analytics uses historical data, leveraging analytical models to provide a best guess or a probability of where we're going in the future. The first major study when we look at the future of jobs is a 2013 study from the Oxford University, and right at the very end of that study there is a list of 702 jobs and their probability to be automated by 2030. And you can see a selection of these on the screen now, hopefully. So when I looked at this list, there are some surprises. If we look down somewhere near the bottom third of this list, we see accountants. I'm sure many of us know accountants. The amount of training that they have to go through to pass their exams, to become trusted with an organization's finances or an individual's finances, actually to see that the probability of that job being computerized being 94%, actually that was quite a wake-up call for me when I first looked at this several years ago. Then, I mean, if you look further up the higher end of the list and we see historians, good news. These are jobs which are not likely to be automated anytime too soon. For those of you that are interested in HR roles, actually many HR roles are also near the top of the tree here, not likely to be automated, primarily because it's those roles which really require interaction with and an understanding of individuals, being able to connect with our workforce. We've heard many of my colleagues on the call here today talk about the importance of understanding the employee voice and the employee experience. We're not yet in a position where we can consider how to automate the questions of understanding our sentiment of an organization. Yet we can start to put in place the kind of solutions and systems that will help us to generate those kinds of data sets really, really quickly. So if we look at the first table here, I've highlighted one row in orange, and that is pretty much 50%. So this is right in the middle. Could go either way, whether it's going to be automated by 2030 or not. If we then seek to look at the bottom of the table, number 702, with a probability of 99% if you're a telemarketer. So what I want to do now is use the telemarketer as a brief example to consider how organizations might start to consider those people who might be vulnerable in their organizations. And then think about how we can start to put in place a support mechanism for those people to help them see potentially that there is a future career path, even to actually show them in the most sensitive of ways the risk of that particular job role when set against the fullness of macroeconomic trends. So how do we do this? The telemarketer, we probably all have an image in mind, but moving away from the visual image, we need to understand what it is that makes up the role of the telemarketer and those people who perform strongly in it, those people who get reward from those kinds of jobs. So we need to hypothesize, what are the skills involved? What are the kinds of people and their attributes that we might expect to find performing those roles? Then we test those hypotheses. We gather some data that actually proves whether or not we're right or wrong. We might perform, various statistical analyses, key factor analysis, so on and so forth. But let's say then we get to a point where we have an understanding of what a typical telemarketer skills look like. And in this example, and this is very much off the top of my head, we are looking at somebody who maybe is self-starting, able to work independently, somebody who may be able to work virtually in the way that we're all having to learn now, somebody who might be good at relationship building, quickly able to get to build a rapport with a potential sales target, negotiation skills, tenacity, and creative thinking, the ability to not just take no for an answer, but to turn it round and present it to an opportunity. You might recognize these in perhaps people that you know. For me personally, my very first job when I was at university was as a telemarketer. So this is something which resonated with me quite strongly. But what do we do with this information? Well, the next step is really to think about how we can start to understand the levels at which these are important, and then understand where this might fit into the organization of the future. So alongside this, we also need to have an idea of what we want to achieve as an organization. Where is our business model taking us, not just in the next year or in the next 2 years, but in the next 5, 10, 30 years from now? What are those roles that we want to imagine as being important for our organization? And how do we characterize those in terms of skills? Once we understand the skills related to a given role, we can then look at the gap in our current organization, and we can compare it with those roles that are at risk of being automated, and then it becomes a matching mechanism. So here, by looking at those skills, those people who are good at self-starting, virtual working, relationship building, etc., they might be our perfect candidates to fill our #1 gap for the future, which is a personal relations advocate. Now, I have no idea what that is. It's a job I made up. And that's part of the fun of this game is, actually, if we look at the history of jobs over the last 30 years, there are so many jobs that didn't exist 30 years ago that do exist today. Things like personal trainers, things like dog walkers. So we have the opportunity now to start to imagine what our organizations are going to be needing for the future, and consider things like a 5G technician or a hospitality programmer. And where these skills might provide a mix. From there, we can put in place a mechanism and a pathway to help move people through. And those first people to move through, those brave few, will be the ones to really blaze a trail, to define what that's going to mean for the organization in the future, and thereby get that first mover advantage and a competitive advantage over the market. So this stuff has real commercial value. as well as being great for our people and great for the health of our organisations. That's just one idea. I realise it's taken a slightly different tack from others. As promised, these are the references that I just pulled out earlier on, but there are many, many more. And if anybody wants to take those up in the future, I'm very happy to connect offline. So this is your screenshot opportunity. Some of these are available by searching online, including audiobooks, which will be great for if we head back into the daily commute. For now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to Faye from Mind, who's going to give us some advice on managing good mental health.
Brilliant, thank you. That's absolutely fascinating. So I'm Faye McGuinness and I'm the Head of Workplace Wellbeing Programmes at the mental health charity Mind. Mind is the largest mental health charity in the UK, and we exist to make sure that anybody with a mental health problem gets the right support and respect that they deserve. And we also have a goal at Mind to support 1 million people to have good mental health at work by 2021. So today I'm going to be talking through the lens of mental health. And I wanted to start by sharing some headlines from our Mind and Coronavirus survey that we've been running for the past 5 weeks to give you a bit of an indication in the UK about how coronavirus is impacting on people's mental health. So we've spoken to over 17,000 people now, and we're continuing this survey for another few weeks. But what we've learned by talking to those people is that just under 2/3 of them have said that their mental health has got worse during lockdown. And that's due to the restrictions on not being able to go outside, feeling isolated and not being able to see people, and real anxiety about mainly their family and friends getting the coronavirus. What we've also seen is that nearly half of those respondents are actually coping by taking on negative habits, so eating too much or little, drinking alcohol or using illegal drugs. And actually we're seeing between 18 and 24-year-olds that 1/3 of those people are using self-harm as a coping strategy. And what we're also seeing is that many people that are trying to reach out for mental health support are not accessing the support that they need at this time. So we know already that the coronavirus is having a huge impact on the nation's mental health. Then if we look specifically at the workplace, I think it's really important to talk about what happened before COVID-19 and what the picture was at that time. Because it's really important to say that before COVID-19 hit, we were already seeing huge issues in terms of mental health in the workplace. So in January this year, Deloitte carried out a review to look at what the costs were for UK employers. And the cost to UK employers of poor mental health at work is £45 billion every year. And £29 billion of that is made up of presenteeism costs. So people being in work but not being as productive as they might be because they're not getting the right support, or they're not being as productive because they're not feeling very well. But also this idea that people were working very, very long hours, but those hours were not very productive because, again, they weren't getting the right support around their mental health and well-being. So before COVID-19, there was already a huge issue in terms of mental health in the workplace. And as we've moved into COVID-19, lots of those issues have now been really highlighted. But what I think COVID-19 does do is provide us with a real opportunity to start to really tackle some of those drivers of poor mental health at work. And we know that many organisations were already starting to do that, but actually what we're starting to see is organisations moving much quickly along that journey as a result of COVID-19. So in terms of some of the challenges that we're seeing and in terms of some of the responses, I mean, I could talk about this all day because there's lots. But at Mind, what we've been thinking about is kind of key groups. So we have a group of people that are working from home. They're still being paid, they're still doing their jobs, but they're finding themselves working in a completely different way. And it's really important that you're thinking about those groups of people and what they need in terms of maintaining their mental health and well-being. But then we've got a group of people that are maybe not working at the moment. They've been furloughed, they've been made redundant, people are losing their businesses, and actually understanding the impact on that group and the impact of their mental health and well-being. And then we've got the group of people who we call our frontline and key workers. So those people that are currently still going into their workplace, but actually they're putting their lives at risk in doing so. And so you then have to think about the impact of their mental health and well-being. So we've got all of these groups within our workplaces. And actually we need to think about what is our role as an employer to support the mental health and well-being of these groups, but what's the role of individuals to look after their own mental health and well-being during this time. And so some of the guiding principles, because I don't have a huge amount of time to go into the detail of it, but some of the guiding principles that we think that employers and HR leads should be thinking about is, one, understanding the current issues that are facing your workforce in terms of mental health and well-being. You know, we talk a lot about kind of the yearly staff survey, understanding, you know, what people are feeling once a year. But I know that when I do my yearly staff survey, if I complete it on a Monday compared to a Friday, you're going to get a very, very different result. Now more than ever, you need to be doing regular pulse checks to understand what some of the fears are that your employees are feeling around COVID-19, but particularly in relation to their mental health and well-being. So understand the issues, talk to your staff. Secondly, we know that mental health stigma is still a huge issue, and the workplace is where most people face that stigma. So actually, we need to be doing a lot of work to think about how we continue to break down that stigma and communicate to people that right now it's okay not to feel okay. I'm doing a lot of work with the NHS, and we're hearing that the hero narrative, which is very, very well intentioned, is actually driving people to think that they cannot put their hand up and say, I'm actually struggling. So that kind of bravery hero narrative, although well intentioned, is actually a double-edged sword. So you really need to be thinking about the messages you're putting out in your organisation around mental health and saying to your staff, please reach out if you're struggling. Then there's something there around everybody having some level of mental health awareness. More than ever, we're going to have to support and have conversations with our teams, our managers, our colleagues. So making sure that everybody in your organisation has some level of mental health awareness is absolutely vital. You don't have to be mental health professionals, but what you can do is you can listen and you can signpost. So if you don't already do that within your organisations, making sure that you deliver some kind of mental health awareness training is vital, and we deliver that training at Mind. But you also need to make sure that your line managers have the capability to have conversations. We hear all the time from line managers that they feel completely nervous about approaching the conversation around mental health because they don't have the skills or necessarily the ability to start those conversations. So we really need to be putting an emphasis on line managers now, because more and more people are going to be struggling, as we can see from my survey. So if somebody starts a conversation and the response to that conversation is quite negative, that could really put off that person seeking further support. So make sure your line managers are equipped with the skills that they need. And then I think lastly, just to say that the culture piece is so important. I think we had started to see employers do more before COVID-19, but I think what we were seeing is that lots of employers were still doing what we would call the low-hanging fruit, rolling out some training, doing some awareness days. But we fundamentally need to think about the way that we design work, the way that we design jobs, flexible working, the way that we design offices. And I think COVID-19 is really going to help us think about some of the positive things that we have done during this time that could really change the way that we design work in the future. So we need to kind of move a little bit away from the low-hanging fruit, start thinking about the systemic changes we need to make, and think about the drivers of poor mental health in the workplace. And then the last point that I just wanted to make is, even though we didn't ask the question directly in our coronavirus survey, we have heard from loads of people that they're really, really feeling anxious about returning to work and actually what that return to work might look like. So I've obviously asked a poll question here just to kind of get an idea of what is worrying people in terms of returning to work. And I think this kind of resonates with what's coming up in our survey, that there's fears of actually still catching the virus. So from an employer perspective, if you are asking people to return to work, your communication strategy around how you're going to keep them safe is not only about their physical safety, but it's around their mental health safety as well. And yeah, I think here, having to go back to a normal work routine, we do have to recognise that for some people, working from home in this way has actually had a positive impact on their mental health. Not having to get on the tube, not having to get, travel for long hours, being able to have a bit more control over your day. And so we have to recognise that for every individual, the impact is going to be different. And although if you work in a huge organisation, asking every single individual how they feel about it is a huge task, what you need to do is you need to understand some of the themes and worries about people returning to work as well. So I'll finish there, but just to say that Mind have a huge amount of information around mental health and coronavirus on our website. And we also have a website called the Mental Health at Work website. And that's a website for anybody that wants to know anything about mental health at work. And we have lots of stuff on there around coronavirus as well. So please do use Mind, use our expertise. And thank you very much today for raising money for us, because our services are in demand more than ever at the moment. Thank you. I'm going to hand back over now to Douglas.
Thank you so much, Faye. Really, really great to hear a bit of an update from Mind, what's going on, as well as all of our speakers who gave some absolutely fantastic insight. I know there's been a lot of comments in the chat already. There's some brilliant questions being asked. We've now got about half an hour, so the way we're going to run this, or anyone who would like to ask a question, you can either do that via, if you ask it by the Q&A, panelists can opt to answer live, which means we'll throw it open to the panel. People can upvote questions as well. I know a lot have already been answered, but it'd be great to maybe get an idea from our panelists on some of their thoughts on those questions. And attendees can also raise their hand, and then I can turn on your mic and you can ask the question directly. So we've got a panel of experts here, guys. Have at 'em, I suppose. Maybe to start, I know Sophie O'Brien's come in with any thoughts on a 4-day week to our panelists.
Sorry, can you say that again, Douglas? What our thoughts are on
Any thoughts on a 4-day week? Do you reckon that'd be doable with remote working with back to Corona?
I mean, I think more than maybe before, right? Because I think actually at Avon we were very flexible before. Lots of people work from home a couple of days a week, but I think it's all about trust, and that's the one thing that actually any organisations that didn't trust their employees to work well from home are now absolutely, you know, it's kind of been proved. So maybe something about, I mean, if you mean by 4-day collapsing your hours and working across 4 days, maybe, because obviously, you know, I guess we're not talking about sort of flexible, you know, working going down to 4 days and earning less. You're talking about being able to collapse your, you know, your full working week into 4 days, which might really suit some people. And I think it's about trust, isn't it? So actually, that's really been demonstrated recently, I think.
I think it's also, and I agree, but I also think it's about the employees' objectives. What do they need to achieve? Who else do they need to collaborate with in able to achieve those objectives? But I agree. I think that, you know, we also support flexible work with some roles. And again, it's about the role. And I think that you're right, moving to working from home has enabled a lot of trust. And also, just as we talked earlier about the conversation around performance and achievement objectives. So I think that it's, you know, I think more companies are going to be exploring flexible working in many different facets, and that will be one of them.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there was a trial done, a 4-day week in New Zealand, actually.
Yes.
I think it's about a year ago. And actually what they found is that staff were happier and 20% more productivity.
Yeah.
So there is, yes, so there was absolutely some evidence there to suggest that that could be a good way of working. But I think it does depend on every individual as well, in terms of their circumstances. But I think, you know, this idea that we kind of work these billable hours rather than looking at what we're producing and our productivity levels feels a bit outdated. But yeah, it's a really good question.
And can I also just add also that, you know, I'm in a global organisation, and so there's a different time zone and different people are working at different times. And as a result of that, we've found that there's a partly flexible workforce anyway, because, you know, there may be days, for example, when I'm having to get up really early for Asia Pacific, and it might just mean that I take some time during the day, whether it's to walk the dog, do yoga, whatever it is. But, you know, so I think flexible working for global organisations is something that's quite common anyway. But I think as a result of what we've experienced across the globe over the last few months, you know, employers are going to look at work differently.
I think the other thing that I've noticed, I've observed personally, is that prior to this, we would have, you know, I felt a little bit guilty when I was working from home. I always had to be there as early as I could and leave as late as I could. I was panicking that people, you know, if they called me and I'd gone to get a cup of tea, would think that I was in the garden. All of that was going on in my mind. And now I'm seeing that I think there's a much more acceptance from people that we have work-life balances. I've been on calls when I've seen toddlers on knees because they've just run into the room. I've seen people, you know, with somebody come in and put a cup of tea down on their desk while they're working. And there's a lot more of an acceptance of that. People, yeah, we've got stuff going on around us. My daughter could walk in right now, and I can't control that. There's a lot more acceptance of that, and I'm really excited about that. I think that is going to transform how people feel about working from home.
Interesting. One question that actually came up earlier I'd love to touch on was from Peter Mailer, who was talking a lot around how organizations might have to change, because a lot of the focus that companies have are looking at their customers, all the analytics, analyzing customer behavior, what all that sort of means. Obviously now with remote working and such, what does it mean for companies? Can we take more budget, more balance, run more programs to look to analyze employees better, to find out who the internal people of our company are, what makes them tick, what makes them grow, what makes them passionate, what are their gripes, just to get a much better view of the company internally, rather than having all of the resources directed to sort of externally. What do you guys think about that? Do you think there's going to be a huge increase in this? Do you think companies are already doing it well? Is it none of their business, or is it more, where does the line fall on this, do you think, guys?
I think a lot more of that. So Peter, thank you for the question. Every analytics project, will have to fall in line with the organizational culture in which it takes place. So different organizations will have different appetites for how they want to analyze their people and what the objectives are for doing so. But I think, presuming that there is broadly a values-based decision to actually do that kind of analysis, then actually I think there's a huge portfolio of potential projects that could be unleashed here. Steve actually gave a really good list right at the beginning, and included things like network analysis. That, I think, it has to start with a signal. Most projects, they won't get off the ground if there isn't a burning platform or a question to solve. So I think it starts with understanding the employee voice, getting signals of things happening differently. And what's really important, I think, is to capture those signals, to record them, and then to start to think about how could we potentially start to measure that in a way that's going to provide us a productive outcome. So, I mean, organizational network analysis is a great use case for looking at productivity, for looking at changes of communication traffic, people working more in an informal environment rather than a highly structured environment. But then you might actually find that you're getting anecdotal feedback of, people being more productive. O&A won't necessarily help you identify productivity, but combining that with other outputs, such as looking at pulse surveys, looking at overall achievement of objectives, looking at even commercial growth, they can then start to provide evidence of how these things can be changing. So I see a lot more of that kind of work taking place. And certainly within our community, I know there's a lot of organizations and they're all approaching these questions differently.
Anyone to add?
I was just going to say, from a mental health perspective, we have something called Minds Workplace Wellbeing Index, and we have over 300 organisations that have signed up to that. And it's the first kind of benchmark of best practice in terms of how employers support mental health and wellbeing. And it involves us doing a very intensive piece of work with organisations where we speak to all of the staff and we assess different areas. But also we review all of the policies, the processes, speak to employers. And it's always so interesting because actually what we see is the perspective of the employer versus what the employees then tell us is often very, very different. But it seems as though because Mind have come in as a mental health charity and somebody independent, employees have felt like they can be much more honest about how they're feeling. And so that's a really useful tool, I think, in terms of us assessing, particularly around the mental health and wellbeing space, how employees are feeling. And I think more than ever with COVID-19, we need to be doing more of that.
Okay. A couple of questions that have sort of come in around somewhat the same area. Our audience is very, very broad for this event. We've got some huge companies, we've got some far, far smaller companies, and a lot of people are more at the sort of beginning of their HR analytics journey. few people have put some stuff in, but what advice would you give for people looking to maybe start their analytics journey, to get a bit more insight from their data, to learn more about themselves as a company internally, especially when starting off this journey whilst in isolation, looking to move this along, as well as sort of quick wins people can get that can have real impact without, you know, hitting the bottom line too much?
Well, from me, I would say start small. Don't try to go for the biggest, most complex analytical model that you can think of. You know, think about a really pressing issue. Think about a simple way to address it. Discuss that with the people who are responsible for that issue, and make sure that you're aligned, and then deliver on it really well. I think once you get some of those early successes, then you'll start to build a reputation, and that in itself starts to bring some momentum. I think there was another question in the Q&A earlier about, you know, I'm in a small organization, so we can't necessarily afford to have a large analytics function. So how do we approach that? And I think it's related. On the one hand, it's not just about, you know, going after these big projects, but actually finding those smaller ones. But on the other hand, it's about driving a culture of analytical mindset. So for me, you know, and what we do at GSK, I think it's very much important to make sure that people understand it's not beyond the grasp of our colleagues. You know, we're not wizards, we're not performing magic here. Actually, what we're doing is applying a very logical process to gather evidence. And I think that if we can find some simple examples, you know, champion those, sell them to some of our colleagues, and then start to get that groundswell movement to say, actually, yeah, we can do this, and this is within our grasp.
Can I just add to that? I think that, and Faye talked earlier about coming in and talking to employees, you know, and I spoke in my session about the pulse checks that we do. You know, they can be very simple. You don't need a huge consulting firm to do that. There's different ways and mechanisms that you can do that. But I just think hearing what your employees have to say and collecting data about specific areas that you think are important to you. And it goes back to the values of your business and the foundation in which you're operating. So I think just quick checks on, you know, different topics that are critical to you, or things that you intuitively think might be going on in the business. You know, I find as a HR leader, you know, I may look at a market and a country and a demographic and say, that's interesting. It looks like we've got a little more turnover there. When I look at the demographics of that turnover, it's, you know, different age groups and so forth. So then I might say to my analytics team, go in, I need more data on this. So now there's simple things that you can do, such as surveying, to using your payroll data and your data that you have around your employees, just to determine whether there's a hotspot or not a hotspot. So I just think it's, you know, you don't need to be buying huge systems. You can do simple things, as Mark talked about earlier, and maybe just containing it to smaller topics as opposed to trying to boil the ocean. I think that's when problems occur, because you don't really have anything meaningful by, you know, going out and scattering and looking for, you know, using many questions or looking at lots of data at once.
The other thing I would add is, I think sometimes if you look at large organizations, they typically have large analytics functions sitting within an even larger HR function. And actually, I hope for the day when, rather than having a go-to people analytics team in a big HR division, you have HR itself is a people analytics function.
Yep.
And you've increased the data savviness, the data confidence, the data competence within HR professionals generally. And actually, in you know, years ahead, you won't need me, you won't need my team, because the HR professional will be data centric. They'll be looking to make evidence-based decision making. So in terms of a small and medium-sized organization, be careful not to fall into our traps, the kind of the ones that the larger organizations here. Don't go and build a separate siloed data analytics function in your HR. Build data competence and confidence across your HR function.
I echo keeping everything as simple as possible. I also think storyline it really well and put the effort in to explain everything that's going on is super helpful. And if you're looking for a place to start, you know, there's lots of curious things out there. Look for a burning platform, look for a curious area in the business. And if you're still struggling, look at headcount. because I think every organization struggles with understanding headcount and the discrepancies between the way different functions need to look at those numbers. And so I think finding a way to simply explain and align headcount across the organization, especially between HR and finance, could be a good way to start.
And also just even, you know, when a small organization goes to medium size, the whole span and layer of an organization, like how many levels do you have in your business? Where is the decision making done? You know, I think that there's, and, you know, once you have different divisions, then you've got to start doing them across them. So I think, you know, data, which Melissa talked about, just the basics of headcount and where people report and how that works, I think is also another very simple way to start.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think it's just taking something simple and doing it for someone who is going to become an advocate of your function. So there's no point trying to take someone who's maybe really not data driven. You know, to go with someone who asks you a question and get them to be your backers and build up your your support network of the leaders who've really seen some value that you've given.
Great. Right, Peter Mailer with his second bite, the cherry. There's been a real focus on what the crisis has shown us with regards to the benefits of flexible working and home working. What other elements of the employment proposition do you feel need to be reviewed? And I think that can sort of apply to every aspect of it, from work optimization through to, again, well-being and what employees are really looking for.
So I think that real estate, as I said earlier, looking at, you know, what jobs need to be in the office, having more of a flexible workplace, I think that the pandemic has really driven some businesses to look at that. You know, and I know when I talk to other companies and maybe smaller companies that are thinking about growing, and they're using the mind of, well, I'll need to get real estate to grow. Where realistically now, if you think about flexible workplaces, it may not necessarily mean in a smaller business that you need an office. You may be able to get people to work from home or use hives or hubs. So I think that's going to be a large part of the conversation for businesses that are growing. And then for larger organisations like mine, it's going to be all around, well, do we need to have everybody in an office? Like, what's the benefit? We've proven throughout this time that we can have people from home. And obviously there are some jobs that need to be, that are customer facing, but you know, I think that whole flexible workforce discussion is going to become paramount, you know, this year and going forward.
I spoke with, just to build on that point from Dyanne, I did speak with a large construction organisation recently, and they were very actively looking at this. They really wanted to understand how they could incentivise their workers to choose when they were going to be working, to fit around their personal circumstances, those circumstances which have become the new normal for them. And I think actually with Faye's poll, I think it also talked about the need to consider whether or not, you know, that's going to be a really strong barrier for returning to work, in the fact that people have actually now built a new routine. For me personally, similar to Steve, I live in Yorkshire, but I'm based in London, and so I'm used to being in London 2 to 3 days a week. Now I've got used to being at home the whole time. Now I don't for any second think that will continue completely, but actually it does make me reassess on a personal level whether or not I needed to be going to London quite so often as I was, and I suspect that that's going to be in the forefront of many people's minds.
Okay, I mean, do we think there's something else that companies need to look at to sort of try and get that well-being and that sort of value proposition? You know, I know, for instance, John Lewis, everyone that works at John Lewis becomes a shareholder at some level. I know that leads to huge amounts of employee satisfaction. I know a lot of people talk about the customer experience as a result of that. You know, do you think a lot more companies are going to be doing, you're going to see more emphasis on programs like that is what people are going to be looking for when they move to their next job? So shifting from, this company's great because I can work from home and I can work remotely, what do you think is going to be the next thing that prospective employees are going to be looking for?
So a couple of things. I think we should, all of those are in the mix, but I don't think we should presume any of them are right for our organisations. We've listened to our colleagues. So let's understand what they're looking for. and build a proposition around their needs. But overarching, if you like, and it came up in some of the other questions, is this, our employee propositions need to be more bespoke. And I think digital will allow us to do that. At the present, we're probably sheep-dipped through learning courses. We all get the same communications. We all go on the same onboarding process. Everything's the same, standardized, cost efficient. Let's do it like that. Actually, I think there'll be more thought, more focus on listening to our colleagues and then translating that into employee experiences that are more bespoke. And learning is a great one. We've recently launched a new learning experience platform using AI, recommending learning products to colleagues who've been on courses. We know what they like. We know what they've commented on. We know what they're searching for. So it's the Netflix of learning, if you like. But that can apply to communications. It can apply to reward. It can apply to any part of our proposition. So yeah, I'll stop there.
I also think that I talk about winning hearts and minds as employers. And, the competition in industries can be tough because there can be wars on talent. I'm in technology, there's other companies that are after the same talent as me. And so one of the bigger things for us is around career development, ensuring that it's not the sheep dip experience, that every employee is provided with a career development plan. And whilst, I argue that employees are responsible for their career, it's up to us to develop them, provide them the opportunities within the business. So I think that's going to be even bigger. And I also think a lot needs to be said for culture. When you've got, and you think about it, in whatever industry you're in, if you've got two companies vying for the same talent, the same person, the talent, and they're paying similar and they're offering a similar job, what you need to do is think about who's going to win their heart. What are the things that are happening around mental health? What's the company doing around mental health? What about corporate social responsibility? Is the company big into that? What are they doing to be a better company in our globe? Things around learning, but that more experiential learning that is more individually based. I just think that there's no one formula, but I think that now, I think candidates and employees are becoming more savvy around career and what's important to them. And the thing that I've noticed through the pulse results we've done through COVID is the amount of communication they receive and the fact that mentally how they're feeling, that psychological component as opposed to just the physical has become even bigger. So I think that, there's going to be lots of different emphasis for different businesses going forward.
And just to add, I think it's really important to remember that it's not just the role of businesses, there's the role of law, policy, legislation. Yes. And actually, we've spoken about health and safety for many years, but really what we've spoken about is safety. And I always say, if you were in your office and a huge hole appeared on the floor and one of your employees fell down that hole and broke their leg, you would do everything you possibly could to make sure that another employee did not fall down that hole and break their leg. And that should be no different to mental health. Exactly. What are the things that are driving poor mental health in your workplace? And I think that we're going to start to see a shift from the safety to the health. And I think that can only be a positive thing. But we absolutely know there are things, particularly in the UK, like the Equality Act, that are not clear in terms of how they protect people with mental health problems. So there are other things that are wider than the employer piece that really have to change in order for people to feel protected and supported around their mental health. And I do think the kind of competitive advantage point is so important. We're doing a programme at the moment with universities, thinking about how we support the next generation of people coming into work. And actually what we're hearing from the young people as part of that programme is we're now looking out for what organisations are doing around mental health and well-being. We will apply for those organisations that we feel are doing good stuff around this. We expect that nowadays. So it's vital.
Yeah, I think the companies that have, really weathered the storm and have, and I don't mean financially, but just in the way they've treated their employees during this crisis will be in a good position to be seen as an employer of choice in the future. It's going to be something people will, talk about, like what was it like there in the pandemic? How were you treated? So it's really important.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are going to be banking a lot of well-being at the moment, which is really good, as well as anyway, generally with regards to communicating between employees, you've got systems like you've got websites like Glassdoor, you've got social media, you've got all this stuff. So I think it's this great new shift in power with regards to employees being able to communicate what the real experience is in a sort of in a anonymous and also sort of verified way to some extent. So I think it's going to be a real big change in that regard. Are there any final questions? Because I know we've only got a minute or so left before we have to hop off. So from the audience, if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask a question, they're more than welcome. Otherwise, type it into the Q&A. Give people 30 seconds or so to do that. Otherwise, I think we'll call to an end. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists for all of their time. I'd like to thank all of our attendees for joining us. Thank you so much for coming for this. It's been brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Sorry, I'm waffling now, so I'll cut to an end. I hope everyone gets the opportunity to enjoy the last bit of the weather. And please do let me know your thoughts and feedback through LinkedIn, email, any other channels that you like. Feel free. I'm assuming this is okay with our panelists. If there's anything anyone wants to follow up with our guys, I'm sure they're available through LinkedIn for messages and things like that. Otherwise, stay healthy, stay safe. And again, Faye, thank you so much for your time as well. And we'll be donated everything to mine. So I know that will go to a great cause. So have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Be well, everybody.
Cheers.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Stay well.